Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this meeting of the Eastern Area Planning Committee, which is one of 3 area-based planning committees of Dorset Council. Our area of remit covers the previous Purbeck District Council and most of the previous East Dorset District Council areas. For the benefit of the public, I'm Councillor Tony Coombs and I'm Chairman of this Area Planning Committee. Can I introduce the officers that are supporting us today? We have Kim Cowell, Principal Planning Officer, James Lytton-Trevers, Planning Case Officer, Liz Adams, Planning Case Officer, Colin Graham from Dorset Highways, Chelsea Gollidge will be reading out the public representations, Phil Crowther is our legal support, and David Northover is our committee support officer who will be taking the minutes. I'd also like to thank all the officers behind the scenes who are making today's virtual meeting possible. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, the Council has had to put in place measures to enable the Council's decision-making processes to continue whilst keeping safe members of the public, councillors and council staff in accordance with the government's guidance on social distancing by applying new regulations to holding committee meetings from remote locations. This meeting is being live streamed to the public and a copy of the recording of the meeting will be available on the website after the meeting. Public participation will take the form of written statements and not public speaking to the committee. I'll be following the agenda as laid out in the pack. So if I move on, please. David Northover, do we have any apologies for absence, please?
Apologies for absence from Councillor David Morgan.
OK, can I also double check, please? I saw a message pop up from David Took. Can someone make sure that he's can get into this meeting? I think he's trying to get into the wrong meeting, please.
Yes.
Thank you. So I'm going to go through the roll call, please, alphabetically. Shane Bartlett.
Present, Madam Chairman.
Alex Brenton.
Present, Madam Chairman.
Robin Cook.
Present, Madam Chairman.
Mike Dyer.
Present, Madam Chair.
Barry Gorringe.
Present, Madam Chairman.
Brian Heatley.
Present, Madam Chairman.
Julie Robinson.
Present, Madam Chairman.
David Took, is he with us yet? Okay, I'll come back to him in a moment. Bill Trite.
Present, Madam Chairman.
And John Worth.
Present, Madam Chairman.
Lovely. Okay. Has David Took managed to join us yet?
I've sent an indication to him as to what meeting he should be in. He hasn't responded as yet.
I've just joined. I've had a cancellation for this meeting from you, David. I don't know why.
Thank you.
David, there were 2 meeting invitations sent out, so we were running 2 meetings in parallel, which is why that cancellation went out. It was a little bit confusing. We had people joining 2 different meetings, but it looks as though we're all here in the one meeting now.
That's correct.
So
okay,
apologies
excellent.
for the confusion for you. So,
thank you.
OK, so for your benefit, the only apology we've had this morning is Councillor David Morgan. Otherwise, we have a full house. We're going to move on to item 2, which is declarations of pecuniary or other conflict of interest, bias or predetermination. Is there anything from members at the moment? OK, if something does come up during the meeting, please let us know as soon as you're aware of that interest. Item 3 is the minutes of the last meeting held on the 10th of February. I've already been given advance notice that Bill Trite has a query on the minutes. So, Bill, over to you, please.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I sent you an email in this connection this morning. I'm very sorry there was so little notice for you of it, but I'm afraid I have to confess that I have only studied the minutes in the early hours of this morning owing to pressure of other things in recent days. I'm very sorry, but well, I think the best thing for me to do is to run briefly through the note that I sent to you, Madam Chairman, for everyone. I am sorry, but I really feel I have to raise the matter of the suitability of minute number 173, which is to do with Ballard 5 Ballard Estate. As I say, I've only this morning examined this, and I would frankly wish I could simply pass over it, despite what I consider to be its omissions. However, since the applicant in this case is likely to appeal, I feel I can't ignore the shortcomings of the minute, since an inspector would presumably wish to see such a minute, and it's therefore very important that it should be accurate, sufficient and correctly balanced. I'm sorry to say that in general the minute seems to me to be a comprehensive justification and confirmation of most, if not all, of what the council officers' arguments were, with hardly anything there of what was said by the 8 councillors who refused the application and by the 2 Dorset Council members who represented Swanage, who also made representations. I can honestly say I don't think I've seen such a one-sided minute in a planning committee meeting before. There are many other shortcomings. For instance, in the second paragraph, there's no specific reference to policy STCD, which is new development should protect and enhance the distinct local characteristics of the area, despite its mention in connection with the subject matter that was described here. Now, this includes Ballard Estate and supports single-storey development only, and was the significant point made, not the matter which is in the minutes of being in the AONB. There's a similar omission in paragraph 5, where this policy and other relevant policies were featured, and if that isn't then minuted, the 2-storey points referred to further on don't really make very much sense. And in the 8th paragraph, all that the officer said was that most of the points had already been covered in the presentation. And I think you'll find there was no response to either public or councillors' objections, as the minutes say, and reliance was placed on a new point made in the officer presentation about differences in form on the estate and on demonstrable harm to local character. The 2-storey issue, which was raised and is the crucial one, was ignored. Now, I note that item 6/2020-0292, which was dealt with at the same time as this one, in that one, the proposer, seconder and votes of the committee were recorded, but not in this arguably more controversial case. And I think treatment should surely be consistent. There is, I'm afraid, considerably more, and what I really do feel is that this minute needs reconsideration at some length. It is very important in the light of a likely appeal. The implications thereof could be considerable. So I would ask you, Madam Chairman, and the committee to allow this minute to be reconsidered, and of course anyone apart from myself who has any views on it can then make those views known too. But I do think what we have in front of us today on number, 173, is inadequate to say the very least. Thank you. I'm sorry to go on at some length, but I think it is important.
No, that's absolutely fine. And I'm very grateful that you've actually read out in full the email, because it's important that, because we are in a public domain, that everyone gets to see what was the content of that email. So I'm very grateful to you for that. I'm going to pass over to Phil Crowther, because it is obviously the realm of the officers to produce the minutes, and ask him for a response to the concerns that you've raised. Phil, please.
Chairman, thank you. Well, it's obviously the committee's role to accept the minutes or not. If there are concerns from the committee as a whole about the accuracy of the minutes, then subject to what Mr. Northover might have to say about the timing of having minutes approved. My view would be that if in the normal way members would have to vote on whether the minutes can be accepted or not. If they're not accepted, then officers will have to revisit the minutes and get them into a form where members are happy with them and can approve them, accepting that probably can't be done before as the whole process can't be done before the next meeting. Because members would need to see the revised minutes in order to vote and accept them, and that would have to wait until the next meeting.
May I ask, through you, Madam Chairman, may I ask whether that single minute, because I don't have any problem with any of the other minutes, whether that single minute could be taken out with the agreement of the committee so that we don't have to revisit everything that's in these minutes next time around, just this one particular minute 173.
Chairman, if I could respond to that through you.
Yes,
my view would be that it's the totality of the minutes. Obviously, members are able to articulate which element of the minutes that they are not content are accurate, and so officers would simply concentrate on revisiting those, noting that the only concern is about the minutes on this item. So in effect, the whole minutes would have to come back, but members and officers would know that the concerns relate to the one item only.
Thank you. And I have to say, I'm inclined to agree with the legal advice on that, that we've done that before with planning applications, that we have an area that we want to look at in more detail, but we make sure that we are happy with the rest of the issues around that. So my view is exactly the same. If members are happy with the rest of the minutes, we will defer these minutes to allow this to be sorted out and bring back the minutes of this meeting and the minutes of the last meeting to the next meeting. Are members happy with that? So give us a chance to sort this out.
Agreed, Madam Chairman.
Yes,
Agreed, Madam Chairman.
Great.
Yeah.
Great.
Agreed.
Agreed.
Is there any dissent? Okay, so in that case, we will defer the minutes until the next meeting. So
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Thank you, everybody.
that's all right. I'm sure there'll be a conversation or two outside of this meeting, and we'll get it sorted.
Yeah.
Okay, so item 4, public participation. Members of the public have been invited to submit written representations, which are limited to 450 words. Please can you turn your microphones off? The maximum number of representations are 3 under each category. Can I ask you please to turn your microphones off? The 3 that are accepted under each category will have been accepted in strict date and time order. Members of Dorset Council who are not members of the committee and who wish to address the committee will also be allowed to speak to the committee. However, all requests have to have been registered with Democratic Services by 8:30 AM on Monday the 8th of March this year. So are there any representations, David Northover, from the public that do not relate to matters on the agenda today?
None received, Chairman.
Thank you. We have 2 planning applications on the agenda before us today. Have there been any requests for deferrals or withdrawals, please?
Good morning, Madam Chairman. Kim Cowell. No, there have been no requests for deferrals or withdrawals. Thank you.
Thank you. The background information relating to the planning applications before us today has been available for inspection by members prior to the meeting, and that covers consultations, objections, representations, as well as the East Dorset and Purbeck local plans and the council's related policies. For each item, I will invite the case officer to introduce their item. Members of the public, planning agents, applicants and town and parish councils have been invited to make written submissions, and these will be read out by Chelsea Gollage. who has not been involved with the merits of either of the applications, but only in providing technical support. They will be read out in the following order: public against the application, public in support, the applicant or agent, Town and Parish Council, and then the local member. Following the public participation section on every item, I will ask the officers if there are any salient points that they wish to clarify. I will then ask members if there are any questions or comments to ensure that everyone has the opportunity to comment. In order to run the meeting, may I request that members of the committee direct any remarks and questions through myself as the chairman, and I will invite members to speak in turn. Any request to speak must be made via the chat facility. At the end of the debate, for transparency, I will take the vote by roll call. The vote will be recorded in the minutes if 3 or more members met the necessary request. I will also ask members to confirm that they have heard the entire presentation and debate before they cast their vote. So we will now move on to the first of the applications, and due to the technology there may be a short gap whilst the presentations are loaded. So moving on to item 5, the first of the planning applications, and that is 6/2019-0656. Outline application on a rural exception site for a development of 8 dwellings, 6 affordable and 2 open market, with details of access and all other matters reserved at Crack Lane, Langton Travers. This item is on pages 15 to 40 of your agenda and was deferred from the previous meeting. So, James, you're going to take us through the presentation, please.
Good morning. I think you need to stop sharing your screen, whoever's got the agenda on, so I can share mine.
You can share yours and then it'll override.
Thank you, I didn't know that. Can everybody see the PowerPoint presentation?
We can, thank you.
Splendid. Well, good morning. The application, as I say, Madam Chairman just explained, is an outline application for a rural exception site for development of 8 dwellings, of which 6 would be affordable and 2 would be open market, with details of access to be agreed at this stage, but all other matters reserved. So matters of scale, appearance, landscaping and layout would be reserved. Just one thing to just point out is you may notice that the report is an update report. So because of the fluctuation in policy at the moment, we had to update the report, and so I've added anything that's changed in the last month in bold to the report, so it makes it clearer. I'll explain these points as we go along, but first of all I'll just show you the proposals. So the site is right on the very edge of the historic core of the village of Langton Travers. This is the main street where all the historic buildings are situated. The site is located on the eastern side of Crack Lane. Crack Lane leaves the main street and disappears down a steep hill, single track. The site is currently part of a field used for grazing horses. This shows, excuse me, this shows some of the constraints that we are in. All of the area is in the Dorset area of outstanding natural beauty. It's adjoining the conservation area. That's the blue dotted area that you can see there. Conservation area runs along down Crack Lane along the edge of the site, but doesn't actually include the site. The conservation area also includes the neighbouring dwelling, White House. The red stars are listed buildings, the nearest being 2 Lees, which is a large imposing detached house set within grounds, and 2 Lees Cottage, which is on the main street and adjoins Crack Lane. there is a public right of way, pink, which emerges opposite the existing entrance to the site, which is a field gate. So those are the main constraints. Excuse me, it's also outside the development boundary, and the development boundary is this black line. As you can see, this is the site here. It falls outside, but on the edge, touching the development boundary. So as such, for policy purposes, it's classed as countryside, where development would not normally be allowed. This red area is a character area within the conservation area, and it's called Zone 1. And in my report, you will notice that I've referred to this, and this particular area, this character area, is mainly the historic core of the village. And it also points out that Crack Lane is a bookend, it uses that actual word, a bookend to development, i.e. everything stops at Crack Lane before we break out into countryside. This development here is a 20th century housing estate. It's not really historic, hence is not included within conservation area. The conservation area appraisal actually goes a bit further and looks at the quality of the conservation area. And if you look, here's our site here. If you look, pretty much all the historic core is within that character area that we just looked at. So we've got black listed buildings, that's Tulees, there's Tulees Cottage. Then we've got purple, positive, historic buildings, not necessarily listed, but still historic. And even on the corner here, we have historic. The White House, which adjoins, is neutral. It's a 20th century detached chalet bungalow of neutral importance. An important thing here, though, is this blue arrow, which was put in the appraisal. It shows that this is an important gap. This field is an important gap between the historic core and the 20th century housing estate that I mentioned just now. The illustrative scheme, and I say it is illustrative because we're only looking at means of access today. The illustrative scheme is not very clear on this drawing. I'll show you another one which is a bit easier to understand, but this is with the same orientation that we've been looking at all the way along. So north's at the top. This is Crack Lane. It's very faint, I know. But a new access would be formed at this point here within Crack Lane. And details of it have been looked at by the Highways Department. And this illustrative scheme shows a terrace of 3 houses here and a terrace of 3 houses here. These would be the affordable dwellings, 6 affordable dwellings. And then, although it's very hard to see, a pair of linked, detached, open market or market houses at this part of the site here. Because we're not looking at that detail, this is illustrative. It's trying to show us that this quantum of development can be accommodated on the site. That's all it's really trying to show. And it's also trying to show whether it will be prominent or this, that, and the other. And these are things I'll look at in a moment. The access, though, I will just mention this while we're here. This would show, obviously, a new entrance onto Crack Lane. In addition, because Crack Lane doesn't have a footway or a pavement along its entire length, it's a shared surface, so pedestrians need to walk in the actual lane itself. The part of the proposal would be to include this pink area, which you can just about make out, which would be a new footway. So the developer would be required to provide a footway or pavement where currently there is a grassy, well, a muddy at this time of year verge. So there would be obviously some intervention within the lane of this pavement. And here we have a sort of slightly easier picture to look at. which shows an illustration of what we've just been looking at. The linked detached houses are different to the plan I just showed you. It doesn't matter, it's just illustrative. But this shows that we would have three 2-bed affordable homes, 2 social, 1 intermediate, 3 3-bed affordable homes, and 2 semi-detached, well, they're linked detached, probably more accurate, but it is, as I say, illustrative, market dwellings. The sizes are shown here. I think that's slightly immaterial. They've indicated the sort of materials. I will come back to that. They're mentioning brickwork and stone and render. That's something which I will return to when I've finished my presentation. And this is a view which you wouldn't readily see because you'd have to be standing in the field. Perhaps you'd get this view if you're looking from the 20th century housing estate that I mentioned. But it shows the development. This is White House, that 20th century detached chalet bungalow. And it shows the development running down the hill because Crack Lane's quite steep. So it shows the terrace of 3 there facing the field, shows a terrace of 3 gable end onto the field, and then it shows the linked detached houses at the bottom of the site. This green is quite realistic. There is quite a dense hedge along Crack Lane, which for all intents and purposes would be retained. On the other side of Crack Lane, I think this is what we're looking at here, are lots of trees. So I suppose those trees, I mean, this is an illustration with a little bit of artistic license, but the trees on the other side of the lane are shown there. However, as you probably have noticed immediately, there's no screening whatsoever between the development and the field. So just going on to some pictures which shows, first of all, we're in the main street here. The top left picture shows the junction with Crack Lane disappearing down. The top right picture shows standing in the road looking down Crack Lane, and you can just make out White House. There it is there. It's white, surprisingly. And we're obviously looking, so it goes down the hill there. So the development would be behind White House. Looking at the bottom left-hand corner, this is Two Lees Cottage, listed building and listed wall wrapping around and disappearing down Crack Lane. And then bottom right, we're looking, I'm standing in front of White House, and the site here, it would be beyond this 5-bar gate, running parallel with Crack Lane, which, say, disappears down. In this picture, you can see how narrow Crack Lane is. I mean, it is narrow. I mean, it's only a car width. You can't stand in the road and a car can pass you. You have to get out of the road. The next picture on the top left shows I've walked down Crack Lane. This verge, it isn't really a verge, it's an informal verge. It's actually not a council maintained verge. It's just where people have pulled in as a passing place, not a formal passing place. Just below this is where a new entrance would be formed. So it wouldn't be formed here, it'd be formed further down. And the footway, the new footway, would come along this verge that you see here and partially across here. The top right, this shows the existing entrance to the field, looking uphill, looking up Crack Lane. And in this picture and the last, you can see that there is a hedgerow. Some of it's been recently removed, I noticed when I went there 3 weeks ago. However, all of this does remain. And this is that informal passing place. And now finally, we're looking in the field. I'm not actually in the field, I'm looking over the gate. There are some stables there. You don't really get it from a picture, but the land is quite steep. It's not only sloping down Crack Lane, but it's also sloping down to this coombe or valley. And the most noticeable place from which you can see the site is from the main street standing outside the Putt Lake Adventure Centre. This is the view you get. There's no zoom on this photograph. This is what you see, and this is the site here. So it will be spreading down this field. You can see the stables. So the development would run down the edge of this field. That's White House. So you see it would be visible. I say it's not possible for development to be invisible, but it would be of some visible form. And finally, this just shows the aerial photo. It shows the stables there, and there's a shed as well on the field, and this is the main field here. So the main issues, which I'll take one at a time. First of all, in terms of principle, as I set out at the beginning, the site is in countryside where we wouldn't normally support open market dwellings or dwellings at all, except for rural exception sites. This site was proposed as a rural exception site, i.e. that it would provide affordable housing, and excuse me, as such can be supported. And if we were to support the affordable dwellings, in principle, this would obviously have to be tied. It would be subject to a Section 106 agreement tying it. I will return to the affordable in more detail. The second part of the principle is looking at this new issue that's cropped up in the former Purbeck District Council area, and that's the situation with the housing land supply. I'll talk about this now. Obviously, it's been revealed that the former Purbeck area no longer has a housing land supply, which effectively triggers what we call the tilted balance. Now, some of you will be unfamiliar with this, but what it seeks is to look at other sites that are outside, for example, development boundaries, and to see whether these will satisfy the sustainability criteria set out within the National Planning Policy Framework. It's in the report, so I'm going to try not to go into too much detail, so I'd rather you ask me questions at the end if you want clarification. But that paragraph in the NPPF, which triggers the tilted balance, is not necessarily triggered in AONBs, in areas outstanding attributed. So this site is in an AONB, and the paragraph is only triggered if it's demonstrated that there is no harm to the AONB. So in this case, as we will look shortly, in terms of landscape character, we wouldn't excuse me, we wouldn't necessarily say no to looking at a site on the edge of a development boundary for market housing, unless, of course, it could be shown that there was harm to the AONB. We are taking the view that there isn't. So what we have effectively then is a rural exception site and two market dwellings. The two market dwellings adjoin the development boundary and can be supported if they meet all the sustainability criteria, which I've set out in the report, and also other tests such as the character of the AONB, and also other issues such as the setting of the conservation area or setting of a list of buildings. So we will take these things in terms. So the principle may be acceptable, but it's subject to specific criteria, and that's what we're going to look at now. So the next one is the affordable housing, which I've touched on. I've explained to you that 6 of the dwellings would be affordable. The applicants actually considered that the scheme was not viable unless it had the 2 market dwellings. This we referred to the district valuer, and the district valuer looked at this very carefully on our behalf. And after much sort of discussion, the district valuer has come to the firm conclusion that the scheme could provide 100% affordable housing. It could still be viable, providing 8 dwellings. However, we have a situation where the housing land supply has become an issue, and where 2 of the dwellings are market dwellings, and so on this housing land supply sort of issue, they can now be supported, whereas before we were not supporting the 2 market dwellings within the scheme because the district valuer said that it should be 100% affordable, i.e. 8 affordable dwellings and not 6. So on the basis of housing land supply, we can now support 2 market dwellings despite the fact that theoretically the scheme could deliver 8 affordable. So in consideration of this tilted balance and whether the scheme is acceptable in many terms, because even rural exception sites need to be sustainable, need to not harm the character and appearance of the area, and then we still have to weigh the balance. Let's look now at the character and appearance of the area. So, excuse me, I'm going to take this separately from heritage. In terms of the character and appearance of the area, obviously it's in the AONB. The AONB officer actually objected to the scheme and felt that it was intrusive within the AONB. I didn't feel so strongly as that. The site clearly would be visible. I think this view is the most important from Main Street outside Putt Lake Adventure Centre. Clearly the development would be visible. You can't make development invisible. It would be seen on the edge of the existing historic core. It would be really only visible from this location and obviously from Crack Lane, but again it would be seen behind the hedgerow. It would just seem like a logical extension of development beyond White House, which I showed you here. So I think it could be absorbed within the existing development without being overly prominent. So I've taken the view that in terms of the character and appearance of the area, whilst visible, it would be assimilated within the existing development that it would adjoin. And obviously the devil would be in the detail. And although illustrative, this looks to me to be a sympathetic way of dealing with developing a site such as this, stepping the buildings down, so on and so forth. The next issue is the setting of heritage assets, and I'll just go back to the and here we go. Now, obviously, there are listed buildings within proximity. 2 Lees has a setting of its own within imposing grounds. It's detached from the site. It's behind trees, a hedgerow. We do not consider that the setting would be impinged by the development in this location here. Similarly, with 2 Lees Cottage on the corner there with Crack Lane, it has its setting within the main street, really. It doesn't have a setting within Crack Lane. The wall that wraps around down Crack Lane forms part of that setting from Main Street to an extent Crack Lane, but I don't think development so detached from it would be harmful to its setting. There is the other point about the conservation area. We've obviously got this important gap. Does this development breach that important gap? I don't think it does. I think the important gap, that's why the arrow is shown there and not here. I mean, it's difficult, to be strict about this, but I don't think that the development imposes on that important gap. What about this bookend? Crack Lane is described in the conservation area appraisal as a bookend to development. Does this development encroach beyond that bookend? Well, no, I don't think it does. The bookend, or it's a good word, I think, but semantics are playing here. But I think that the development, the bookend, is really the historic buildings here. We're not really looking at the site. Does it affect the character and appearance of the conservation area? Well, yes, of course it does. Any development in the conservation area is going to affect its character and appearance. It's whether really there is harm or substantial harm or not. In this case, we take the view that there's less than substantial harm. Less than substantial harm means doesn't mean there isn't any harm. It means that there's less than substantial harm, and then we have to apply a test. We have to weigh the public benefit against the harm. So we're taking the view there's less than substantial harm. Now, if this were not for affordable housing, which obviously has public benefit, doesn't it? And to an extent, the market housing has public benefit because it provides homes for people. We've taken the view that there is less than substantial harm, but the benefits of providing 6 affordable dwellings in this village would outweigh that harm, and on that basis we can support the proposal. I've actually probably covered the character and appearance of the A and B already. Highway matters I would like to leave to my colleague, the highways engineer. In terms of the recommendation on page 33, so in view of what I've said, the recommendation is to grant permission subject to a Section 106 agreement, which would tie the dwellings to 6 of the dwellings to affordable housing. I would also suggest that there is on the page 36, there's an alternative recommendation B, that if the 106 is not agreed, that we refuse the application. This effectively is to prevent them not providing the affordable houses and just building the 2 market dwellings, which is a theoretical scenario. So it does ensure that we don't end up with the 2 market dwellings being built and no affordable. I would also, although this is an outline application, so all matters apart from highways are reserved, I would like to add one additional condition, and that would relate to the materials of the development. When we discussed, or when I discussed this with the district valuer, I made it quite clear in her calculations that if we were to allow development here, we would expect it to be stone. We wouldn't build anything in this village in brick. It's not a brick village. We wouldn't build it in render. It's not a render village. I appreciate there's a bit of render here, but that's actually probably render covering stone because of water penetration. So we did cost the viability of the scheme using natural Purbeck stone, and that was what we based our calculations on, well, amongst other things. And so we would add a condition, if you are minded to approve the application, that the subsequent dwellings shall be constructed in Purbeck stone. I think that probably covers all I wanted to say, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you, Officer. I'm temporarily taking the meeting because the chairman has temporarily dropped out. She has an IT issue which she's trying to resolve at the moment. So if we're ready, I'll move to questions from members. And I have Councillor.
Sorry. Did we want the highways engineer to present the highway issues first? Because I didn't cover that in my presentation.
Beg your pardon, Officer.
Yes. Mr. Graham.
Yeah, Mr. Graham, do you want to present your report? Sorry.
Yes, good morning. Colin Graham here, Dorset Council. The site, I'll start off with the name, Crack Lane. It does it does conjure up images of the fact that it is narrow, and I looked at it on numerous occasions very carefully, and I've also discussed it with my managers, and we consider that on balance it is acceptable. It's the narrowness that lends to its track record of safety. The width of it is such that it's actually at the end of this first property. There's a wall, or the corner of the building. The carriageway there is 3.6 meters from the wall to wall, which is yes, it's narrow, but it's not a point where pedestrians and vehicles would normally meet, and even if they did, there is sufficient room for them to pass, albeit if personally I'd stop walking at that point. As you come up to the junction, it massively widens out. There's plenty of passing space. The entrance to Crack Lane is indeed a traffic calming feature in its own right. It causes anyone entering it, there's all the signs up to warn you it's unsuitable for large vehicles, not cars, they're fine. And yes, it's of a width where two cars at that, there's enough room to pass at the junction, it's lined out for that. But when you turn into it, you do so very slowly, especially for those people that know it. And I hasten to add that people that don't really know it don't go down there. And if they did on their very first occasion, they'd be extremely cautious. And that's to our favour. The going beyond that end wall, it then there's a couple of driveways that lend to a feeling of space, and then very quickly you've got this verge area that you can see on the bottom right photo there, and it's that we'd wish to have made up as footway from there. So it'd be footway down from there, heading south, gradually widening up, and then getting to the verge. So the distance from that point there to the sort of that lamp column, there is a lamp column in Crack Lane, the distance to there is about 17 metres. So it's a short distance where a pedestrian may suddenly encounter a vehicle. In terms of development itself, in terms of pedestrians, they already walked, some of them walk down to the cemetery on occasion. You've got the White House itself, which has pedestrians from it, and there's been no incidents. The sorry, just gathering my thoughts there. Any vehicle coming around would have visibility of those pedestrians, and it doesn't take a moment just to, if it was a pedestrian, just to let them walk beyond. But as I say, with 3.4 metres, that is adequate for a car. A car over mirrors is about 1.7, 1.8 metres wide. So there's a car, it can pass a pedestrian and there'll still be plenty of room to do so. So yeah, on balance, having discussed it with my managers, we feel that we haven't got sufficient grounds to refuse it, but committee may feel otherwise. Thank you. Over to you, James.
Okay. I think the chairman is back in the meeting.
Just about. It's still a bit iffy. I really apologise. I've had to come out several times and reboot. It just kept dropping completely. So I've lost tracks. Shane, if you just want to take us the next step forward and then I'll pick it up again.
Okay, I think Mr. Linton Trevor says, did you want to pick up any more on the report, or do I go to the officer for the public statements?
Yes, no, it's fine. Obviously, highway safety was one of the issues raised in the representations, and obviously we're going to hear more about that, I think, within the representation. So that's all I need to say, really.
Thank you for the report. Thank you, Mr. Graham. And if Chelsea could pick up now with the public statements, please.
Thank you. The first comment is from Chris Carnplace. My name is Mr. Carnplace and I live at the top of Crack Lane. My concern is with the access to Crack Lane. In my view, it would be completely inappropriate to have the extra level of traffic that this development would generate. The top of Crack Lane is narrow and dangerous and currently labelled as being unsuitable for heavy goods vehicles. On their plans, the developers have marked a refuge line to be painted for the safety of pedestrians. The width of the road outside my house is 3.3 metres between the walls on either side. The refuge width, as marked, is 50 centimetres. The reality is that there isn't room for both a car and a pedestrian. I never leave the safety of my driveway if there's any traffic. Currently, very sensibly, the refuse collection lorries don't go down the lane, and I wonder how easy it would be for emergency services to get to the new houses. Some years ago, my house was crashed into and serious damage done to the roof. The bollard on the corner has been knocked over more times than I can remember since I moved there in 2001 and twice in the last year. The lamp post has been driven into, the speed limit sign has been driven into, my neighbour's wall has been driven into and badly damaged, and my wall is constantly being marked by vehicles rubbing against it. I mention this to give an idea of just how dangerous it is. Further traffic would exacerbate this danger. I would recommend a site visit to truly appreciate the unsuitability of access. The next comment is from Gillian and Rod Evans. With regards to the above application, we would like to raise our concerns over the possible dangers regarding any potential building works in Crack Lane. It is extremely narrow, the road surface needs attention and therefore highly unsuitable for heavy traffic which could not support it. It is also a lane and not a road, frequented by walkers and local people visiting the cemetery alike. I endorse my wife's comment and opinion. The disturbance to local people will be massive during the building process, and the ongoing additional essential infrastructure within this community from the proposed site will be damaged in longer term. The natural resources, and particularly the wildlife in this area, should also be protected. The next comment is from Henry and Anna Saverley Hill. All the points in our letter of 21st December 2019 still stand. The objections are as follows. Access to and from the High Street is excessively narrow. The width between our property and that of our neighbour on the opposite side of Crack Lane provides no safety margin whatsoever for passing of vehicles and pedestrians. This could be potentially dangerous for mothers and children, wheelchair users, cyclists and walkers. The approach to Crack Lane from the High Street is a blind corner, and vehicles attempting to go down Crack Lane are forced to reverse back with no visibility in order to allow the upcoming traffic through. Crack Lane is what is a lane, not a road. With several other considerable building developments already in progress within the village, this lane will not be conducive to any further increase in traffic flow. Finally, on a personal note, we have suffered considerable damage to our wall on several occasions, and likewise was the same for our neighbour opposite, thus emphasising all the valid objections mentioned above. The next comment is from the agent, who is Alan Davies, on behalf of Chapman and Lee Planning. Chairman, members, thank you for the opportunity to address you today. The application seeks outline permission for 8 dwellings. 6 will be affordable for local families secured as such by a Section 106 legal agreement. Specifically today, you're being asked to consider the principle of the development and the access details. The proposals are supported by your senior housing officer. The parish council has no objection. It is worth pointing out that this application, with 2 open market dwellings and 6 affordable, produces a ratio of 75% affordable. This is almost the same ratio as the scheme approved last year nearby at Spyway Orchard, a ratio of 78.6% affordable. In comparison, the scheme for 19 dwellings approved last year at the Old Malt House included no affordable housing. Given the council's under-provision of housing and the very real need for affordable housing, this proposal helps meet both these council priorities in a sustainable village location. Given the above, I hope that you will support your officer's recommendation and approve the proposals. Thank you for your time today. That's all the comments for this application. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chelsea. I'm just keeping the Vice Chairman on notice that my connection is still wobbly. It hasn't dropped out again yet, but we just cross fingers as we keep going. So, bear with me while I still try and get my head around this. So, officers, we've heard the representations from the public and the agent. Are there any particular points you want to respond to before I pass it over to the member debate?
Members, if there are concerns regarding traffic to and from the site, one of the things that officers could put forward, should members want to consider it, is to impose a further condition on construction.
Kim, are you responding to the public representations?
Yes, I am.
Yeah,
they've raised issues about traffic to and from the site. One of the things members might want to consider as they further the debate is to consider a construction management plan condition that may satisfy some of the neighbours' concerns with regard to access and egress during construction. It was just a thought. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kim. Okay, so we've heard all the public representations. I will now go to the members of the committee. Shane, you're the first one to speak on this application this morning.
Sorry, madam. It's Councillor Trite's first to speak. I didn't know whether you, when you dropped out, I didn't know whether you picked up Councillor Trite requested to speak.
I haven't got it showing on my screen.
Okay.
In that case, Bill Trite, you're first to speak. My apologies.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I hadn't actually asked. I was going to ask, but I just put the cursor over the point where it says type a new message. I didn't put RTS in. Next thing I know, somebody's kindly saying I'm trying to speak, but I was going to anyway. And it's just a very brief question to the officer who made the presentation. I'm very sympathetic to the ratio of 6 affordable houses to 2 market houses. But how would he answer the concern that we are here setting a precedent of incursion into the countryside, which is what particularly concerns me, despite the fact that I really like the idea of 6 out of 8 affordable houses?
James, would you like to respond to that, please? James, you're on mute. Looks like I'm not the only one having.
Sorry, I had a problem. I don't know how it got onto mute. I'll just try and get the PowerPoint back. Can you still see the presentation?
No.
Oh, okay.
We've got a frozen image of the meeting on your screen. That's better.
Good. Okay. Is that? Can you see the photographs?
We can.
And you can hear me. Good. Now, you've mentioned the issue about precedent. Yeah, precedent can be an issue, but obviously we look at each site on its merits. Now, we're looking at this site today, which is adjoining the development boundary. We would only normally look at sustainable locations for affordable housing, or indeed any housing whatsoever. We consider that this site is sustainable because it would be within easy reach of the village centre. So where you've got bus services, you've got a shop, you've got a pub, you've got facilities within and a school, and you've got these facilities. So we would class this as a sustainable location. It doesn't set precedent though, because we're looking at this site, we're not looking at other sites. Other sites may be more prominent. They may not be as well located in relation to the village. So it doesn't set a precedent per se. It's just one site that we're looking at today, not others. So I don't agree that granting permission here would set precedent for other locations. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Bill, does that sufficiently answer your question?
Well, of course, the precedent could be set anywhere else, not just here. It's the principle of allowing development in the countryside, which could of course apply anywhere else in the county for that matter. It was just a concern because, as I say, the idea of 6 out of 8 affordable houses is very attractive.
I think in this case it's all about the 5-year land supply. Is that right, James?
That's why we're looking at allowing 2 market dwellings. If you read the report, the situation changed within the last 4 weeks actually, where suddenly we found we were in a situation in the Purbeck area where normally we wouldn't have supported market dwellings in a scheme like this. We would have expected it to be 100% affordable, 8 dwellings, but because of the housing land supply, we're supporting it. But let me just return to what I said earlier. We don't have to allow development. There is an exception to this rule, paragraph 11 of the NPPF, without boring you here. In AONBs, if we find there's harm to the AONB, we don't have to allow market dwellings. So there is a get out of jail free card that you can play here. But in this case, we've decided that there isn't harm to the AONB, and so we can support the scheme. So yes, it isn't automatic that if there's a lack of a housing land supply that we allow dwellings everywhere. AONBs are an exception to that rule, and so there is that extra safeguard in AONBs to prevent obviously indiscriminate development which could suddenly occur.
Thank you very much for that. Shane, you are my next speaker. You're on mute.
Madam Chairman, I have nothing to say at the moment. I'll wait and hear more of the debate. Thank you.
Madam Chair.
Who's that?
James, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
I think Kim Cowell would like to clarify this housing land supply. There is a slight subtle difference between housing land supply and housing delivery test. And I think Mrs. Cowell probably would need to clarify that before we discuss this further.
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. Kim, over to you, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. If I can just come back and just explain a bit more about the altered position. The government has introduced a delivery test for local authorities to meet quotas on how many houses they deliver. So as well as housing land supply, where you have to identify land for development, there is a housing delivery test where you've got to also ensure that that housing is delivered over a period of time. In January, the local authority, the end of January, the local authority was advised that for the Isle of Purbeck, the Purbeck Council area, former Purbeck Council area, had failed to meet its housing delivery. The delivery quota came at something like 74%, and then sanctions are imposed on local authorities to depending on the severity of the under delivery. So, for example, if the housing delivery falls below 95%, which it did in this instance, the authority has to publish an action plan on how they're going to bring forward more housing. Also, in terms of the housing land supply that is already been identified, there's a requirement that a further 20% buffer be added to the local authority's 5-year housing land supply if the housing delivery falls below 85%, which is the case here again. And then James mentioned in his presentation a presumption in favour if the housing delivery falls below 75%, which is the case for the Isle of Purbeck. And so because of that, the consequences for the local authority are, whereas we might previously have been able to resist a market housing element, that situation has now changed. I thought I'd just clarify in a little bit more detail some of what James has already presented. It's very complex, and I know that it's a lot for everyone to take on board, but it's something that we must heed. The paragraphs in the National Planning Policy Framework, which guide local authorities, are set out on page 6 and 7 of the NPPF, and that's where it sets out that the presumption in favour of sustainable development will apply, and that's where we also then consider the tilted balance that James referred to, where you're measuring delivery against harm, and hopefully that is a short explanation of the position that we find ourselves in. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kim. It's quite a lot to get your head around. My next speaker is David Took, and then I have Brian Heatley, Robin Cook and Alex Brenton in the wings.
Thank you, Chair. I had 2 points. I'll start off with a third, more general one about delivery, as Kim's just been talking about. Sadly, the local authority are not in charge of delivery, developers are, and it is in the gift of developers whether they actually develop where they've got planning permission. And the way we allow developers not to develop is appalling. However, that's not something we can consider here. If I move on to the 2 points I was originally going to make, the first one is about the highways. Colin Graham and James Litton Trevor's both described what seems to be a fairly dangerous narrow lane. James said that he would get out of the way of any cars oncoming, and I think Colin said he would probably prefer to get out of the way and get off the road. If he's a pedestrian, if he's pushing a buggy or is in an electric wheelchair or was being pushed in a wheelchair, how do you get out of the way? It strikes me that this narrow lane is quite unsuitable for increased traffic. And when they talk about putting a footway in, where will the footway go? So that's point one. The second point is NPPF talking about entry-level exception sites, paragraph 71 of the NPPF. There's a footnote 34, which leads on to say that entry-level exception sites should not be permitted in national parks or within the Broads Authority areas of outstanding natural beauty or land designated as green belt. And my understanding is that this is all part of an AONB, and therefore that footnote would say that an entry-level exception site should not be permitted. So perhaps officers could explain or answer both of those points. Thank you.
Thank you. Kim, do you want to come back on that one?
Yes, as explained, there's no presumption in favour of sustainable development, and in relation to any development on the edge of a village, then we will need to consider the lack of housing delivery, as I mentioned earlier. Here, we would just need to demonstrate that it doesn't compromise the protection of the AONB, and that is the test. The tilted balance is you have to consider the harm, and in this instance the officer view is that the harm to those characteristics, the conservation area and the AONB, are not sufficient to override the presumption in favour of sustainable development.
So you're ignoring paragraph 71, is that correct?
Chairman, it's Phil Crowther. Do you mind if I just make a comment in respect of paragraph 71, just to help Councillor Took?
Yes, please.
So paragraph 71 talks about entry-level exception sites and says they should be adjacent to existing settlements, proportionate in size to them, and not compromise the protection given to areas or assets of particular importance in this framework. And as Councillor Took correctly says, one of those areas or assets described there includes areas of outstanding beauty. Case officer has explained that in his judgment there isn't a compromise to the AONB. So in that, if members made the same judgment, then the Councillor Took's concern wouldn't apply. So it's not, paragraph 71 isn't a automatic prohibition on development outside settlement boundaries of this type. If there's an impact on, if they're in an AONB, it's only if it would compromise the AONB itself. So in effect, the case officer explained that in his view it wouldn't compromise the AONB, but obviously that's a judgment for members to make. I'm just pointing out it's not an absolute prohibition.
Could I come back, please, Chairman?
Yes.
Paragraph 71B says not compromise the protection given to areas or assets of particular importance in this framework. There's then a footnote 34, and part of that is to say that entry-level exception sites should not be permitted in national parks, areas of outstanding natural beauty or greenbelt. Now that seems pretty specific to me. It's not classifying relative harm, or it says should not, full stop.
Madam Chair, can I just say something?
Yep.
I think the point here is that the word should is the emphasis on the word should, but I think the point here is that if the councillor feels that there is harm to the A and B, then that's a view that he can take.
I'm not arguing there's harm.
Okay.
I'm saying NPPF
David,
says it should not happen. End
David,
of.
can you let James finish, please?
No, what I was trying to say was that if members took a view that there was harm to the A and B, then obviously the scheme could fail. So it is obviously this tilted balance, this measuring harm against benefit. So it's a sustainable location where we can provide 2 market dwellings and say 6 affordable. Is the benefit? Does the benefit outweigh the harm? Is one point that we're looking at, or is there harm that would outweigh that benefit? So this is something we're looking at in the tilted balance.
Okay,
So
David,
sorry,
James, I thought you'd finished.
I have finished. Sorry.
Okay, David,
I'm sorry, Madam Chairman.
David, I'm going to allow you to come back one more time. Okay. And please show the same amount of respect to officers as they're shown to you.
I'm doing my very best. The point is, I'm not talking about whether you demonstrate harm or lack of harm. It's simply that the NPPF says that these type of sites should not be permitted in areas of outstanding natural beauty. Doesn't mention harm or otherwise, or whether there's harm or if it's outweighed. It just says should not be permitted, and that's a simple point.
Thank you.
Okay.
Kim, you wanted to come in.
If I may, please, Chairman, can I just clarify and to come back? I think we need to read section paragraph 71 in its entirety. It reads, local planning authorities should support the development of entry-level exception sites suitable for first-time buyers or those looking to rent their first homes, unless the need for such homes is already being met within the authority's area. So the paragraph qualifies what entry-level homes are. To the best of my understanding in relation to this application, and James can clarify if needed, the Section 106 isn't going to require that the scheme provides entry-level houses for first-time buyers. So whilst I hear what the councillor says, I think in this instance that it's not an absolute, and it's not intended that the entry-level exception sites and the reference to that, which is in the footnote, paragraph 33, footnote 33 and 34, that in relation to this application, James has just confirmed that that's correct. The Section 106 isn't for entry level. So the whole of paragraph 71, which talks about the provision of entry level homes being inappropriate in the A and B, is not applicable in this instance in your officer view. Thank you.
Thank you, Kim. I'm now going to move on to the next speaker, and that's Brian Heatley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm sorry, I'm going to slightly prolong the legal argument, but I want to be sure I've got this right. It seems to me that the bit of the NPPF which is most relevant here is paragraph 11D and the footnote that brings us into the housing delivery test. That is to say that because we have failed the housing delivery test, we have to grant permission unless 2 things. We have only 2 possible grounds not to. One is that there's a clear reason that a special area, in this case an AOB, is going to be damaged. And the other reason is that the adverse impacts of doing so significantly and demonstrably outweigh all the benefits. And that's what we got to look at. If that's right, first I'd like to ask a question. James Lytton-Travers said he could see how the development could be done in a way that would not affect the A and B, and I agree that, you know, the drawings we saw, and if there's a condition about Purbeck stone and so on and so forth, that is quite likely to be the case. But if when the full application comes back with the detail, there is something which changes that decision. I don't know, they built a tower or it's got a pink roof or something that we really don't like. Can we then change our mind about how far the AONB has been affected? I mean, it seems to me it does actually depend on the detail. The second thing is a comment. I don't really think we have any prospect of maintaining a reason against this development where the adverse impacts significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits. The benefits of 6 affordable homes I regard as very considerable. I don't really think it's going to damage the AONB. I don't see that the conservation area is going to be damaged, in particular because of the trees in between. I'm more convinced about the worries about the lane, but I live down quite a busy, very narrow lane. And as Colin Graham said at the start, it's kind of so narrow it's safe. People just don't go very fast. And in practice, such places do seem to work out reasonably well. Thank you.
Madam Chairman, if I can just
Yes,
come back
please,
and answer the councillor's question. Sorry, through you. Apologies for jumping in.
No,
My
that's fine.
eagerness to answer. Yes, Councillor Heatley. Obviously, if they come in with a pink roof and a tower, then we would, if we consider that unacceptable, we could refuse that
Right, okay.
reserve matter scheme on grounds of design or its visual inappropriateness within the context of its setting. Thank you.
Thank you. Has that satisfied your queries, Brian?
That's fine, thank you. I was pretty sure that was the answer, but it's nice to have it confirmed.
Okay, thank you. I'll move on to Robin Cook then, please.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman. Mine really is just a question of clarification, and then can I reserve the right to come back further in the debate, please? It's really to Colin Graham, I think. It's regarding highways mainly. I want clarification, if you would, Colin. You mentioned about the footway that's being provided, possibly under the 106. That's fine, I understood that. You mentioned about the white line, and I think you said 17 metres in length. It was mentioned by one of the objectors as well. Could we just have a bit of clarification about that side of it? It's where pedestrians presumably have to walk or travel within. Can you just show us on the photos or wherever on the plan where this is and where it's going to and from, please? Thank you.
Through you, Chair. Do you want me to take this now?
That'd be good. Thank you, Colin.
Okay. Yeah, thank you for calling up the plan, whoever did that. The path isn't 17 metres long. I just said that from the sorry, can I take control here, if I may? I've got a request, haven't I?
You need to go backwards.
Yeah, sorry.
Go hit the arrow left back button.
If I'm on, that would do where I'm looking at now.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, with the slides there. The 17 metres is roughly from this lamp column through to the point where the footway commences. So it's through this section. That's the early stretch where it will remain acting as it is at the moment, which is a shared surface. It is a shared surface because it takes people down to cemetery and it takes people to the White House that live there, or postmen or whatever, delivery boys. Yes, this might lead to an increase in footfall. That footfall, for the number of dwellings proposed, about 8, we normally look at about 0.4 trips per day, vehicle-wise. So, sorry, not 0.4 trips in the peak hour per dwelling. So for 8 dwellings, that'd be about 3 to 3.5 extra trips in a peak hour. on there, so that's very low. That's sort of one every 15 to 20 minutes additional trips. The number of pedestrians, that would be very low. The people going further away from the village, I mean, they're either going off to the shop or maybe to see friends, but on the whole, they'll be going out of town out the village to Swanage or further afield, and then it's going to be likely to be car-based trips. So it's acting as a shared surface at the moment, and yeah, that's all I want to say on that. Thank you.
No, that's fine. It really, thank you very much. Through you, Chair. It's just that I wanted clarification of exactly where that was, and I think you mentioned that, and I didn't quite pick it up in your presentation. So thank you for just clarifying that one. But I would like to possibly come back later in the debate, if I may, Madam Chairman. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. My next speaker is Alex Brenton.
Thank you, Chair. I actually know this site quite well, and I've actually walked down Crack Lane several times. And when I'm in the Langton area, I like to drive down it because it is such a sort of green and leafy lane, whereas most of Langton is sort of fairly up on the top and open. Having, you know, if you use the Swanage Road, the bottom valley road, and look up, this site would not be particularly visible because it sort of tucks into the bottom of the village. The stopping the settlement boundary at Crack Lane seems to me a slight, well, I mean, all settlement boundaries have to be somewhere, but it's a relatively sort of arbitrary finishing there. It finished there because that's where the houses were. I can imagine it wasn't that they thought, oh, we could build there. So I don't think this proposal would actually harm the AONB or the settling of the village into the landscape. But my very, very big concern is Crack Lane as an access point. You don't often see people walking down there, but when they do, they're you know, countryside walkers marching down the middle of the road. There is no, very little verge to jump onto. Or you go down to the cemetery, which is fair enough, a sort of village activity. And I cannot see how, even after building, and hate to think of the delivery lorries and things trying to get down Crack Lane, that would be very difficult. If they come up from the valley road, there is a long stretch where there is nowhere for two vehicles to pass, and also not visibility, so you wouldn't see they were coming up. So if they come in from the top, you've got that quite a tight right angle. Even once the building was done, you do have, we're assuming affordable housing, so therefore we're assuming effectively young families, even if they haven't got a family to start with, so you will have buggy traffic. I'm just very concerned about Crack Lane. Is there no possibility on your drawing, you have the footway, but there's no way to set the development in further once you get past the White House, to make it a proper turning space between the White House and the entrance? Because you cannot really have vehicles reversing back onto Langton High Street. It's just going to be horrible. It looks like a wide splay there, but you do have traffic coming straight down, and I can't see that it will work. Could that hedge below the White House be recessed back in far enough to make a pull-in point, you know, sort of a passing place before you get to the entrance of the development itself? That's what I would really like to see. Thank you.
Okay, Colin, did you want to come back on those comments?
Can I also say something?
James,
Yes,
James, would you like to go first? And could you call up the drawing of the actual footway improvement, please,
Yeah,
afterwards? Thank you.
Madam Chair, the whole point is that we don't lose the hedge, because it would then make it would completely destroy the character of Crack Lane. Crack Lane, as you can see in my photographs, is this rather attractive, narrow, leafy lane lined with hedgerows pretty much for its entire length. And a lot of people walk down there because the footway is just down there. I've encountered lots of people when I've been there. And also you walk down to the cemetery. There's a little graveyard down the lane. And so it has a leafy appearance. I mean, the whole point is that we keep the hedgerow. We wouldn't really want to lose it. And if the councillor is suggesting that, then it would obviously make it very exposed, and we really wouldn't be particularly keen on it. The footway, as Colin pointed out, would be provided here. This is White House's driveway. It would be down here. So obviously, I did point out that it would create some small urbanisation of the lane, which is currently a leafy lane, but we are prepared to accept this footway if we can keep the hedgerows. But obviously, yes, the introduction of a pavement immediately urbanises something which is quite raw, because you can see in the main street here, on this side of the road at least, we don't have any pavements or footways. So no, in answer to the hedgerow, we would rather not do anything with that. Incidentally, I think this part of the hedgerow may well be in the ownership of White House, and not actually the applicants. Mr. Graham is just going to he wanted this slide. Is that right?
Thanks. Yeah, thank you.
Is that the right one?
Yes, that's the right one. It's yeah, the footway is shown from the bottom corner. Sorry, the bottom corner where it says White House near their garage, almost off the drawing. What's shown in the pink? The pink will be footway. So pedestrians will have their own protected area in that, across that length. So it's a fair length, and it's also going into development where the access is. You can see a footway wrapping around into the expansion of the carriageway, which provides a turning area. Earlier on, comment was made about refuse vehicles. I should imagine refuse vehicles, yeah, they don't go down Crack Lane at this point. They would come off the A351, either on their way in or return trip to Swanage. Nothing to do with the village. They would come up here, pick the rubbish up. They could turn around, do a 3-point turn here, and then go back north up onto the A351. So the refuse vehicles to serve here, it can be done safely. And I say that from the end of the footway improvement that's proposed to 17 metres going down to the existing lamp column at the top of Crack Lane, that would be acting as it is now, a shared surface. And say when you come around a corner as a driver turning into Crack Lane, visibility is such that you're constrained and your speeds would be right down to a virtual crawl. Pedestrians would be on the eastern side of the road, so it'd be against the buildings. You've got the lamp columns and the other street sign there, again keeping people away from the wall, and it's wide enough for a car to pass a pedestrian. Yes, myself, I said I think anybody would naturally stop and hesitate. If you had a pram, as was mentioned, I think you'd have the confidence with that a car driver coming around, approaching either from behind or in front, coming from the high street, would come around cautiously, or they'd see you from a good distance away if they were coming from the north, and they would let you go first. That's perfectly normal behaviour. And I can't remember the councillor's name now, who said about where he lives down a country lane, that's the sort of behaviour you expect. And that's what we were considering when I discussed it with my managers. Thank you.
Thank you. Robin, you asked specifically if you wanted to come back. I don't want to end up going round in circles with everyone having second chances. Do you wish to make a proposal to the meeting?
No, Madam Chairman, the only reason I said that was because when the announcement was made, originally it was for members' questions for clarifications before you opened it up for the debate. And we seem to have got the questions muddled up with the debate in some respects.
No, I take both together.
Well, I have nothing to say at this stage. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. In that case, I will go to Shane Bartlett.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and thank you for the officers for the report. It was an excellent report and a very good presentation. And the debate from members has been really good. I've got concerns about Crack Lane, and the narrowness of it is my biggest problem, my biggest issue with this proposed development. But that said, I think we have to have an understanding as the planning authority that the government that set down the amount of housing numbers that have to be built, the fact of life is that Purbeck as a district is failing to meet that housing delivery. In 2 of the last 3 years, for the amount of homes that were required to be built was 465, and only 345 have been delivered, which means that we haven't met the test in this district region, and therefore there is a presumption in favour of sustainable development. I think that the district area of Purbeck has a desperate need for affordable housing. I think we lose far too many children and young families out of Dorset for the very reason they can't find housing accommodation within the county, and I think this site will bring forward 6 affordable homes. I agree and concur with virtually everything that Councillor Heatley said, and I don't think it will bring demonstrable harm to the AONB. And I think, Madam Chairman, on the basis of all of that, I think I wish to propose that we go with the officer recommendation as laid out in the report. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you have a seconder?
I'm prepared to second it, Madam Chair. I mean, we're in a regrettable situation, but I don't think we really have any other choice.
Thank you, Brian. Just so that everyone can see, as the camera didn't go over to you, that was Brian Heatley seconding the proposal. Okay, I have no new speakers. I have people that have already spoken, wanted to come back, but as I've said, I don't intend to go round in circles again. We have a proposition on the table to grant, which has been duly seconded, so we will now go to the vote. And again,
Madam Chair, can I just add the condition regarding stone before you vote? So I would suggest a 10th condition worded: the reserve matters shall be for dwellings constructed in Purbeck stone only, and the reason being to safeguard the character and appearance of the AONB and the setting of the conservation area.
I'm happy to accept that, Madam Chairman.
Brian, are you happy to accept that?
Yes, that's fine.
Okay. You've just jogged my memory as well, James. Earlier on in the presentation, I think it was Kim suggested a construction management plan moving forward. Do we want to include that now or as part of the reserve matters?
The only point I would make about that condition is that if you read the objections from the neighbours, they weren't really referring to the construction management phase. They were talking about the lifetime of the development. So they were saying that actually the development would be, for its lifetime, the issue with the highway safety, not the actual construction management. So I'm not quite sure what we really would gain by that.
Okay. Are members happy to leave that at this point? I'm going to perhaps suggest that the reserve matters comes back to us given the sensitivity of this application. So if it is deemed necessary at that point, we can then add it in as part of the reserve matters.
Agreed, Madam Chairman.
Brian, are you happy with that?
Sorry, not used to this seconding business. Yes, I agree.
Yeah, I have to make sure that you're both in agreement before members vote on what's being put forward, because if you didn't agree, we'd have to go back and sort it out. So I'm now going to move to the vote. and I will take that by roll call. So, Shane Bartlett.
Grant, Madam Chairman.
Alex Brenton.
Oh, against or no.
Robin Cook.
I've seen that all presentation have followed the debate and I support Grant.
Mike Dyer.
Present throughout and I support Grant.
Barry Gorringe.
Present throughout, Madam Chairman, and I support Grant.
Thank you. Brian Heatley.
I've been here throughout and I'm in favour.
Thank you. David Morgan has apologised for the meeting. Julie Robinson, can you turn microphones off, please?
I've been present throughout, Madam Chairman, and I'll support Grant.
Thank you. David Took.
I've been present throughout, taking part in the debate, and I do not support this motion. I am more in favour of refusal.
Thank you. Bill Trite.
I've listened to the debate throughout and participated, and I'm in support, just.
Thank you. And John Worth.
Yes, I've been present throughout and I'm in favour of this support.
Thank you. David, can I go to you for confirmation of the outcome of the vote, please?
You can, Chairman. 8 for, 2 against.
Lovely. I think I agree with that as well. So in that case, the application is granted with the extra condition about construction materials. Thank you. I've had a request that we take a 5-minute comfort break, please. So
Sorry, Chairman. You had 2 proposals, for and against, if the section 106 isn't signed. Sorry to come back.
Sorry,
on
yes.
that point. Thank you.
Yes, I picked it up at the briefing and then forgot it on the day. So yes, the office of recommendation. I think you'll find that the proposer said as per the officer recommendation, which was A and B. But just to clarify, I'll just scoot back to it myself so I can have it in front of me. So recommendation A was to grant, subject to the completion of the legal agreement with the various conditions, and then Part B was to refuse permission for the reasons set out below if the agreement is not completed by September 21 or such extended time as agreed by the head of planning. And that's about the failure to provide the affordable housing, and that's the bottom of page 38. Has that clarified it for everybody? I'll take that as a yes. As I was just about to say, we've had a request for a 5-minute comfort break, please. So if we can come back at 11:42. Okay, it's now 11:42 and we are reconvening this morning's planning meeting. We are now moving on to agenda item 6, which is 6/2020-0154, proposed erection of 3 dwellings and associated parking, land at Priest Road, Swanage, which is pages 41 to 62 on your agenda. And Liz Adams is going to be presenting this one.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Hopefully you can see my presentation now.
Yeah, it's just loading.
Thank you. So this application is for the erection of 3 dwellings and associated parking at land at Priest Road, and it comes before members following objections raised by Swanage Town Council and in the light of the level of local interest in the proposals. Your officer's recommendation is for approval. As members will be aware, Swanage is located in the former Purbeck area, so it's subject to the Purbeck local plan. The Swanage local plan, in addition to the Purbeck local plan, applies to the Swanage parish, and applications are to be determined against these 2 plans together. So this diagram shown here shows the application site located in the southwest, in the western part of Swanage, within the development boundary shown here with the black line, and it is south of the red outlined area denoting the Hurston Conservation Area. The Swanage Townscape Character Appraisal supplementary planning document identifies the area in which the site is located as having a character type of council estate development. And as previously explained by Kim during the last presentation, the former Purbeck District Council area recently failed the housing delivery test. So as you know, there is now a presumption in favour of sustainable development in this area, and the tilted balance applies to considerations of applications for new housing. Following paragraph 11 of the NPPF, as previously summarised by Councillor Heatley, permission should be granted unless the proposal results in clear harm to assets of which the NPPF gives particular importance, or the adverse impacts of the development would significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits. Areas of outstanding natural beauty, as has already been discussed, are one of the areas of particular importance identified by the National Planning Policy Framework. And Swanage lies within the Dorset AONB, where proposals must be judged to not have significant impact on the character of the area. So this Google image shows the application site in the context of the surrounding estates. The sea is off here to the east. The site is surrounded by residential development, predominantly laid out as 2-storey semi-detached and terraced housing, both to the north, east and west, and we've also got a terrace to the south. The west of the site is more recent development at Ash Close, where the properties are larger and some are detached. So the setting of the application site is urban and extensively residential in nature. And this plan shows the proposed development of 3 dwellings in the centre of the site. So I'll return to that in a moment, but just to give you some more context, this is the view along Priest Road, heading towards the junction with Bell Street, and the application site lies to the south, which would be up this way here. You can see they're part of the conservation area. This Google image is looking up Marsh Way, and we can see dwellings with Purbeck stone cladding and then red bricks buildings beyond. And you can see the topography, the way it rises to the west and also to the south. From the junction with Bell Street up to the properties up here, the site rises by approximately 4.5 metres, almost 5. So this results in dwellings to the south of the site being set at a significantly higher level. These are the properties in Bell Street, so we're looking down here at these properties here. Probably haven't quite put my arrow right there. And this is the application site on the right. And then further up Bell Street, looking across the application site, are views of the red brick development in Ash Close. And these photos were taken prior to the clearance of the site. So views into and across the site are already punctuated by existing dwellings, and the site isn't on the settlement edge. The development of this formerly undeveloped green space would increase density of development, but it is not considered to demonstrably change the settlement pattern, and accommodating housing within the settlement is considered preferable to extending into greenfield areas within the area of outstanding natural beauty. So it's not considered that the development of the site will result in harm to the AONB. A second asset to be considered is the conservation area, Hurston Conservation Area to the north. So this photo from Google again is taken looking south here towards the application site, which at that time was very vegetated. And you can see here where the conservation boundary ends. No harm has been identified by your conservation experts in relation to the setting of the conservation area, but it is noted that there is an importance that some greenery is maintained here just to soften the impact of any boundary enclosure. There's a public right-of-way footpath shown here in pink, which runs through the site and along the western boundary down to the Priest's Way bridle path, which is shown in green. The proposal would maintain the existing route of the footpath, and this photograph again was taken prior to the clearance of vegetation. Concerns have been raised by the parish that the proposed development of this site would result in the loss of important green space. So having looked at documentation relating to this, the land was identified as having potential for tree planting in the Swanage Green Infrastructure Supplementary Planning document. But as has been explained by the landscape officers, this work was aspirational, and the land is not currently protected as open space by policy OSR of the local plan. So going back to the block plan of what is proposed, there's the terrace here, and it's going to, we've got the public footpath retained along the western edge, and an area of landscaping to the north to provide some space for planting, and along to the east. Off-street parking is to be provided with a new access onto Bell Street, and it's going to be slightly levelled, because as we saw that the site rises, so it'll be a flat area for parking. Concerns have been raised by neighbours about parking congestion and access for emergency vehicles, but 2 off-street parking spaces are to be provided per dwelling, which accords with the council's recommended parking levels. And Dorset Council highway officers are satisfied that the proposal will not result in danger to highway safety. So these are images taken by officers which show the site now it's been cleared. You can see obviously a much improved view, as it were, across to Ash Close and down to the lower properties on Marsh Way. So the proposed terrace block would face the existing dwellings on Bell Street with the intervening parking space, and they would have fenced private rear gardens sloping downhill northwards. So although the orientation of the site layout will result in some shading from the proposed dwellings of the gardens, they are approximately 12.5 to 30 metres in depth, so these are considered long enough to benefit from adequate sunshine. This is a cross section here along the western boundary alongside the footpath, so down here. As you'll see, a retaining wall is pretty low there, and at the moment they've shown 1.5 metre high fencing adjoining this. Finished floor levels have been provided on the submitted plans, so a condition hasn't been proposed in relation to those. This is the other side, so now we're looking at the eastern side of the site, and here the change in topography is quite well demonstrated. So you've got the properties on Bell Street on slightly higher land, gradually dropping down to the Ash Close level to the north. The proposed dwellings are slightly lower than those existing, so they won't appear overbearing. Due to changes in the land levels from west to east, there will be a need for a slightly higher retaining wall on this side, and the highest point from ground level will be 2.6 metres. So the planting strip to the east is really critical to soften the visual impact, and proposed condition 5 with secure details to make this element acceptable. The dwellings are modest in size with 3 bedrooms. One of those is in a habitable roof space. Concerns have been raised by objectors that the proposal represents overdevelopment of land, but there is a requirement to make efficient use of land in a manner which doesn't harm the character of the area, and this criterion is considered to be met. Given the siting of the dwellings immediately to the south and west, concerns have been raised by objectors about loss of privacy and light and the potential for overlooking. The building to building distances shown here are approximate, but they demonstrate acceptable separation distances in planning terms. Although the dwellings will be elevated compared to those in Marsh Way, no demonstrable harm from overshadowing is anticipated. And there are no side-facing windows proposed, so overlooking to the west would only be oblique. The proposed dwellings are offset from one Marsh Way, which is the closest property, and would look over the blank flank wall of that dwelling and the driveway, which you see on the Google Earth photograph. So no demonstrable harm to neighbouring amenity is anticipated. Other concerns that have been raised relate to materials, drainage and biodiversity. In terms of materials, the planning statement accompanying the application has suggested the use of red brick, of plain tiles and grey window frames. And objections to the use of red brick particularly has been received, as existing properties on Bell Street have the Purbeck stone finishing. As is evident from this photo, there is both red brick and Purbeck stone apparent in the immediate vicinity. So the use of red brick would not necessarily result in harm. But in order to ensure that materials are acceptable, it's suggested that the condition is imposed, and that is number 3 on page 60 of your agenda. The site lies within flood zone 1, so it's unlikely to flood, but condition 4 is needed or considered necessary to secure a drainage scheme to avoid potential risk of exacerbating surface water flooding that does take place in the area. And then in terms of biodiversity, the clearance of vegetation from the site naturally raised concerns about harm to biodiversity, but this was the landowner's right, subject to compliance with the wildlife designations. It didn't represent development in itself. The application site is not subject to any designation or ecological protection. Condition 7 is suggested to secure enhancement features alongside the landscaping condition, number 5, which would ensure that we get some appropriate planting on the site. So in conclusion, the proposal would provide 3 additional dwellings to the area's housing supply without compromising the visual character of the area or the amenity of neighbouring residents. The development is considered to be acceptable in terms of highway safety and drainage. It will result in modest adverse impact arising from the loss of green infrastructure and loss of associated potential for tree planting improvements. Whilst this weighs against the proposal, it's not judged to significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits of the development when assessed against the policies in the National Planning Policy Framework taken as a whole. So, subject to conditions relating to materials, drainage, landscaping and biodiversity, the proposal is recommended to you for approval. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Liz. I'm now going to go over to Chelsea Gollage for the public representations.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. We have a comment from Richard Kosker from RCC Town Planning Consultancy. This statement is written by RCC Town Planning Consultancy on behalf of the applicant and in support of this application. The committee report confirms that residential development of the site situated in a sustainable location is in clear compliance with local plan policies. MPPF makes clear councils should enable sustainable growth and support government's objective of significantly boosting supply of homes. More significantly, the council unable to demonstrate a 5-year housing land supply. The proposed dwellings would make an important addition to housing stock in an area with acknowledged lack of provision. With regards to further detailed planning considerations, no objections have been raised by any statutory consultees. in response to objections raised by local residents. Proposal for two-storey terrace reflects surrounding housing. Given variety of buildings in this locality, it's considered that the proposal would sit harmoniously with surroundings and enhance the street scene. Sites situated on sloping land, meaning ridge levels and locality vary greatly. Proposed dwellings slightly lower in height than adjoining houses to south and west. Houses are not 3 stories, instead third bedroom fits in roof void, ensuring overall scale and massing comparable with nearby properties. Use of red brick not out of keeping the local area. Examples of houses constructed in red brick very nearby in Ash Close on the corner of Bell Street, in Sanborn Close and Hyers Days Road. Committee report confirms that development is of acceptable scale, design and won't have an adverse impact on the character of the OMB. Good separation distances and oblique angles between proposed dwellings and neighbouring properties ensures the proposal won't have an unacceptable impact on neighbours' living conditions. Parking provided on site complies with adopted parking standards. Due to the sustainable location of the site and public transport links, the lack of one visitor space won't compromise highway safety. Highway Authority has no objection to access or parking arrangements. Drainage engineer noted some surface water flooding in adjacent area in extreme events. To mitigate, they recommend a condition regarding design and maintenance of the surface water drainage scheme. Committee report confirms mitigation measures to prevent adverse impacts of the Dorset heathlands will be secured through seal payments. As such, development accords with policy ME2. Site is not protected by open space and recreation policy OSR in the local plan. Housing delivery has not been provided for the past 3 years. Benefits of proposed development are that site is ideally positioned to provide much needed housing within sustainable settlement and will contribute to shortfall of housing land supply. No areas of harm have been identified that demonstrably outweigh this significant benefit, and as such, councillors are urged to support the recommendation for approval. That's the only comment. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you very much, Chelsea. Bill Trite, you are one of the local members. Do you wish to speak at this point, or well, I'm going to bring you on first if you wish to speak.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I do wish to speak. I'm happy to go now by all means. May I ask though, were there no other speakers from either the public or the councillors?
We received a request from Councillor Suttle, but it came in after the deadline, and a conversation was held with the Democratic Services, and he accepted the fact that he was out of time.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Chairman, sorry, it's Phil Crowther. Do you mind if I just jump in just to clarify an issue with Councillor Trite before he speaks? So, Councillor Trite, it's your decision whether you speak now as ward member or as a member of the committee, and if you speak as ward member, it would then mean that you can't take part as a member of the committee. So it's a question for you, and I just don't want you to make sure that you're aware of the role that you're performing when you speak on this matter. Yeah. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I am intending to speak as a member of the committee, if that is okay. I don't always do that when there's a controversial application in Swanage, but I think I will on this occasion, if I may.
That's fine. Carry on.
Okay. Well, this actually is not just a piece of land that's left over from a 1950s council house development. It's in fact a historic landscape feature. And that's been confirmed by a review that we've done of through historic ordnance survey maps of the area, dated 1902 and 1928, and they detail all the old paths and cartways around the site. So it's not just any old piece of land. It is certainly one of the last remaining pieces of open green space in Hurston, which is the most densely populated part of Swanage. The open natural space has always been much valued by local residents for its mix of trees, hedges, birds and wild flowers. That is until 10 or 11 months ago, when the greenery was destroyed and the wildlife driven off on the assumption of gaining this permission. Now, the report sets out the 6 key planning issues that we're supposed to consider, so I will take them one by one, if I may. The first issue is that of the principle of development. One of the reasons for recommending approval is that the proposal will contribute to local housing supply when there has been an undersupply of housing delivery. We've already heard a little bit about this. As we in Swanage are acutely aware, though, there has been a lot of housing approvals in the town over the last few years, some of which have yet to be sold or built. Now, these numbers have already exceeded the housing numbers in the Swanage local plan. So, and Swanage is not quite the same thing as Purbeck, as I'm sure members will appreciate. And I know that the Town Council wishes to raise this matter with Dorset Council in respect of undersupply comment in the report, and I'm sure they'll do that soon. Now, this is the loss of a historic green space, much valued by local people who need it in this very built up and most densely populated part of the town. Now, such spaces have been progressively lost in recent years, and this is one of the very few left. The application is contrary to the Swanage Green Infrastructure Strategy. There is a potential adverse impact on the adjacent Hurston Conservation Area, and I'm afraid there's a very strong possibility that these houses will end up as second homes or holiday lets. They are certainly not affordable housing for local people. The report admits there will be harm from the loss of green infrastructure, and I say that this does outweigh any benefits of this scheme. So I have no hesitation in saying that this application ought not to be acceptable in principle. The second issue is that of the scale, design and impact on the local character and appearance of the AONB. These buildings do not integrate with their surroundings, and the layout is admitted as being unconformable with them. The massing of the houses is inconsistent with surrounding properties, as is their design and their scale. Consequently, they detract from and spoil the appearance of the immediate area, and they jar with the street scene. This would be more apparent with the benefit of a site visit, of course, but I recognise that is highly unlikely. And moreover, the house's construction in red brick is out of keeping with most, although not all, of the nearby houses. It's important to note it's out of keeping with most houses. The houses on the site would not themselves contribute to the high local density, but they would remove the present relief to that surrounding high density which this open space provides. Thus, with reference to the reasons for this recommendation, again, the proposal is not acceptable in its design and general visual impact. The third issue is the impact on the living conditions of the occupants of neighbouring properties. The report admits that the 3 houses will have an impact on residential amenity for some dwellings, particularly in Ash Close, but it avoids saying that it's a negative impact. The report is all minimisation of unwelcome effects. It's always harm which isn't considered sufficiently harmful. They're value judgments which could be equally and as easily justified for the alternative conclusion about the effects of harm. There's no doubt that there will be overlooking, loss of sunlight and reduced privacy for certain existing residents, which should not be acceptable. So with reference to reasons for the recommendation again, there is a disputable degree of harm to neighbouring residential amenity, which could well outweigh any benefits of the proposal. The fourth issue is highway impacts and parking. Again, the report consistently minimises any problems. It says, quote, "There are no concerns that the parking scheme would lead to an increase in on-street parking. End quote. Well, it almost certainly in practice will, at least marginally, even given that off-street parking provision on the site meets the statutory requirement level. The intention amounts to a council of perfection, I'm afraid, which everyday living will soon frustrate, and the Hurston roads will be that little bit more congested. The fifth issue is that of flood risk and drainage impacts. Now, there are fears of excess water runoff from the fields and down the adjacent footpath, but this is one for the experts, and I do not feel I'm justified in commenting one way or the other on that. And the sixth and final issue is that of biodiversity impacts. Loss of a much appreciated oasis of wildlife in the midst of the built-up area represents the destruction of nature and the green environment, not its conservation. Biodiversity opportunities which would otherwise exist will not be met by putting up a bird box and a bat box. This is the squandering of an opportunity for continuing with a little bit of countryside in the town. The site may not be identified by the Dorset Natural Environment Team as part of an ecological network, but it's still a most welcome haven for wildlife and good for residents in such an area. Again, the report admits, quote, the current application would see the loss of some green infrastructure and increased urbanisation, unquote. In this day and age of climate change, etc., that is surely to be avoided whenever possible, not indulged. We need to give greater weight to preventing the loss of green space and not claim that the loss is outweighed by more of a housing supply when there is actually oversupply of market housing in Swanage. So finally, Chairman, may I appeal to members to listen to what local people and their elected representatives are saying. There have been 45 representations from neighbours opposing this scheme, as well as a long letter from Councillor Gary Suttle representing more. Please heed what the very well-informed Town Council is saying and leave local residents with this important piece of green space. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Bill. I'm going to ask if officers wish to respond to some of the comments that Bill has made.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess I need to just clarify that for the purposes of the National Housing Delivery Test, Swanage does form part of Purbeck, and therefore, whilst I appreciate what Councillor Trite says about housing delivery within Swanage and the permissions that have been granted, for the purposes of consideration of the application before you, we do have to follow the presumption in favour of sustainable development that the government has imposed upon us. In terms of a lot of what Councillor Trite says, he's correct. There is an element of planning judgment, which has been made on the basis of officers' experience and understanding of appeal decisions and case law. Obviously, members have the right to make their own planning judgments, but they do need to be able to show that there is demonstrable harm that outweighs the benefits of housing supply provision. In terms of just references to massing, it's your officer's opinion that the massing of the proposed terrace would be equivalent and less than other terrace, the masses of other terraces in the vicinity. There are judgments obviously to be made about the impacts on amenity. So you've heard officers' opinion, you've heard Councillor Trite's considered view as well. Again, it is a matter of whether there is a level of harm that is demonstrable and can be shown to outweigh the benefits. So I think that's all I need to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Liz. Bill, do you wish to come back on anything that's been said? And then I'll move on to the next speaker.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Yes, it is a matter of judgment, and where one places the weight of arguments. I did think you were likely to advise me, as you did, in connection with Swanage being considered for these purposes as part of Purbeck. So I can't argue with you on that one, but I would appeal to members on all the other grounds that I've raised of judgment to support the refusal. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Well, we don't have a proposal for either grant or refusal at the moment. I'm going to move on to the next speaker, and that's David Took.
Thank you, Chair. A question in terms and really trying to assess potential harm. I know that where you have, for example, scheduled monuments or listed buildings, that what's important is not just stuff that directly affects those, but also affects the view from those places outwards. And I note that this is very close to the Hurston Conservation Area. And what I'm trying to assess is what the view from Hurston Conservation Area of this land might be. Would it affect? Thank you for putting up the slide. So you can see that from the conservation area, you are directly looking at this application site. Is that correct? And if somebody confirms that's correct, then
through you, Chair,
is there no harm?
This is the view from the conservation area, yes, and the site is in the as demonstrated,
right in your face, yeah. So is that not considered damaging to the conservation area? Is my my first question. Oh, well, is my main question. Thank you.
Louise, would you like to answer that, please?
Thank you, Madam Chair. This aspect has been considered by the Council's conservation officers, and they're satisfied that they don't perceive harm. You'll be aware, obviously, there's other development outside the conservation area in the near vicinity. The proposed houses are set away from the conservation area. It's not considered that they would result in harm. Thank you.
Although they are central to the view from that area by the look of that picture. Is that right?
Through you, Madam Chair. Yes, that's been considered.
Okay, thank you.
Did you have another point, David, or should I move on? Okay.
I think that was my main point. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. I shall move on to my next speaker, and that's Alex Brenton.
Thank you, Chair. My concerns are over the fact that this development seems as though it's sort of trying to hide itself. The whole of the Hurston area, the houses tend to look out at you, you know, quite boldly. They face the street, they face each other in places, and there's a consistency and a sort of unity to design up there. Even though some of the new ones along Ash Close are a different sort of style, they're still sort of proud of themselves. And this seems very much like the idea is to take a green corner, which was probably fairly discreet, though used, and hide some houses in there. And therefore, I don't feel that this development sort of suits the area. I'm sure people would object if it was actually facing directly on the road as well, but it would be more in keeping. So I just think the style and the setting is inappropriate for the Hurston area. And also I am concerned this is an area where, although there are sort of front verges, there isn't much, should we say, informal green space to play with. So I am concerned about the loss of amenity to the area of the green space up there. I know once they get out of town, they get up onto the downs, it's different. But this is a fairly sort of suburban style area, and this is their open informal space for youth, for youths and children to hang out. And so I am concerned about the style overall and the loss of amenity.
Thank you very much, Alex. I didn't hear any questions in there, so I will move on to the next speaker, and that's Brian Heatley.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Brenton has virtually taken the words out of my mouth. Part of the trouble is that this is an informal green space, and unless the officers can help us, we don't really know how it has been used. It may be immensely important to the local kids who often don't go far from home to play, but having a place where they can meet and generally hang out is hugely important. So is 3 houses. I find it difficult to decide whether this bit of green space outweighs the benefits of having 3 houses without having a little bit more understanding of how in practice it has been used in the past. Is there anything to help us with that?
Liz, do you want to come back?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was just going to point out to you that this photograph and also I guess the aerial photograph that I showed before shows the site in the state that it was prior to clearance recently, and it was pretty well covered with vegetation, shrubs, brambles, so not really kickabout space if that was what was being envisaged. Obviously there was mention previously about the benefits of the vegetation for biodiversity, or birds at least, but in terms of suggesting that this was an area for children to play on, I'd say it was limited value in terms of just limited size of area that's only grassed. And the second thing just to remind members of is that this is not covered by any particular policy in relation to being used or made available as open space. Thank you.
Thank you. Does that answer your questions, Brian?
Well, not quite. Quite often places that are a bit secluded are very attractive to kids in this kind of suburban environment. I feel we don't know. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Don't forget to turn your mic off. Thank you. I'm going to move on to the next speaker, and that's Shane Bartlett.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I have the greatest sympathy with local members concerning planning in Purbeck and particularly in Swanage, obviously with quite a constrained area and been surrounded by AONB on the one side and the sea on the other. But it has been a fact of life for a number of years now that unfortunately due to the housing numbers that the government is forcing us to build, that towns have had to take the weight of that development over quite a number of years now. And for all of us that represent towns in particular, we've all seen how our towns have expanded. And that has been part of the problem in bolting on those larger developments onto towns and the problems that they cause in terms of the local infrastructure and the impact they have on the residents. Now, this one that we've got in front of us is obviously very modest. It's only 3 properties. I am somewhat surprised by, in terms of the applicant, that it's not affordable, but obviously within planning law, it's a site that is so small that it doesn't need to bring forward affordable housing. But I think that is a shame in respect of the local area and the need that there is for that, but we'll have to deal with what's in front of us. In terms of any harm to the ONB, there isn't any. It's within the settlement boundary, so I'm quite content with that. The actual plot of land as it appears, as has already just been highlighted, is an open green space, so it has been of limited value, I think, to the local community in terms of using it as an open green space. And I do note that the residential properties surrounding the site all have gardens, which in this day and age is quite a luxury, and from the plan it would appear that some of them have quite large gardens as well. And obviously the 3 new proposed houses, 3 houses, will have their own gardens as well. I'm always a little bit nervous about when we start talking about flood risk in an area, and I noticed within the report that the consultations from the drainage engineer has said that there would be necessary mitigating measures put in place to alleviate or to reduce or to mitigate against any proposed flooding that there may be in the future. So I think, in conclusion, Madam Chairman, I think that I would propose that we grant the application as laid out before us. I don't really see any material planning considerations as why it should be refused, and I suggest that I'm suggesting that I propose it as per the officer's recommendations within the report. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there a seconder?
Madam Chairman, Councillor John Worth, I would be prepared to second Councillor Bartlett's proposal that we accept planning permission on this site for the reasons stated.
Okay, thank you. I have one more speaker. Bill Trott, you wanted to come back. Can you keep it brief, please? I understand it's a point of information.
Yes, just a point of information, Chairman, about how this land has been used. It has not been used as a kiddies' play area. It has been deliberately kept and appreciated by local people as a wildlife, a little piece of the countryside, wildlife area in the middle of the town. And the thing that when you speak with local people, what they mention more than anything else is birdsong. Absolutely. It's gone in the last 11 months since they've been driven out, but that's what that's what people saw this little piece of land as being. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. You might have picked up that for me the chat is still not working, so can I just double check with officers? Do I have any more people wishing to speak on this?
None, Chairman. Dave North over here.
Okay, in that case then we will move to the vote. We have the officer's recommendation, which is to propose, and that has been, sorry, to grant, and that has been proposed by Shane Bartlett and seconded by John Worth. So once again, through the roll call, I will start. Shane Bartlett.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I've listened to the officer's presentation and I've taken part in the debate and I vote to grant.
Thank you. Alex Brenton.
I've listened to the, thank you. I've listened to the debate. I have enough concerns that I am voting against.
Thank you. Robin Cook.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I've listened to all of the debate and followed the presentation and I vote to grant.
Thank you. Mike Dyer.
Present throughout, vote to grant, Chairman.
Thank you. Barry Gorringe.
Present throughout, Madam Chairman, and a vote for grant.
Thank you. Brian Heatley.
I've been present throughout and I'm voting against.
Thank you. David Morgan is apologised. Julie Robinson.
I've listened to the debate and I vote to grant.
Thank you. David Took.
I've listened to the debate. I'm not fully satisfied and I vote to reject.
Thank you. Bill Trite.
I've listened to the debate and participated, and I vote against.
Thank you. And John Worth.
I've listened to the debate and I vote for grant.
Thank you very much. David Northover, can I come to you for confirmation of the outcome of the vote, please?
Yes, Chairman. 6-4, 4 against.
Okay. Therefore, the proposal is carried and the application is granted. Thank you all very much for your contribution. Okay, so that's the last of our planning applications. Item 7 is the planning appeals summary. There are 2 appeals that officers wish to report to you, and they are on pages 63 to 66. Kim, over to you, please.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. The first item that we brought back to members is at number 1A, Battlemead, Swanage, both appeals that we've summarised for your benefit in Swanage. Both applications refused, one a committee item and one a delegated, the first being a committee overturn for a new dwelling at 1A Battlemead. The main reasons for refusal were the effect on the character of the appearance of the area. The inspector, as you can see from the officer report summary, disagreed with the reason for refusal and felt that it would have a neutral increase in density. And in relation to the living conditions and outlook and impact on privacy, he also concluded that it would be acceptable. You can see in full on page 64 the inspector's justification for allowing the appeal, but I'm pleased to report that the application for costs was successfully defended, that the council hadn't behaved unreasonably in refusing the application. Liz was going to run through the second
Before
appeal.
you move on,
okay. Yeah.
Kim.
Oh, sorry.
Bill Trutt wanted to comment on this one.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. If I may, this isn't exactly a surprise outcome, especially as the vote on the committee was so very, very close. But I noticed when in turning down costs, and I'm very glad they did so, because it showed that both sides in this discussion were being reasonable. In that discussion, in the explanation of why costs were not being granted to the applicant, I noticed the statement that it was possible that costs could have been granted as a result, although they decided not to, because it was not reasonable to put forward the lack of affordable housing as a reason for refusing the application. Now, I'd appreciate the thoughts of other members of the committee here, because I have no recollection whatsoever of that reason ever having come forward in the discussion on this item. No recollection of it having come forward as a reason for turning this application down. Chairman, through you, may I ask whether anyone else has a recollection of that, or is it just my memory that's at fault?
That's an interesting one. I don't recall it either, but state my memory is these days anything could happen. Kim, could you shed some light on this?
Yeah, I'm just reading the inspector's. I'm just reading the inspector's costs rebuttal, and that's a direct quote. Paragraph 10 from the inspector's conclusion says just that. Liz is going to come back because it was she oversaw the summary, so I do apologise. Her knowledge of these is better than mine.
I'm certainly surprised to see it there because it was only for a replacement and one additional dwelling.
Mayor, if I may, Madam Chair, I do recall this one because I presented it to members, and there was concerns raised by at least one member that the dwellings being proposed did not accord to affordable, suitable and decent housing, which was a sort of quote from, I think, the council's plan rather than the local development plan.
Right. The site is obviously far too small for affordable housing, and the number of units was far too small for that. But I just had no memory of it whatsoever. Thank you.
Okay. Shane wants to join the party.
No, Madam Chairman, it's been answered. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
And Liz is going to provide the second summary, Chairman, if that's all right,
that's
about
fine.
the conversion in Swanage, which is also allowed.
Yeah.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Madam Chair. So this one was a delegated decision made by officers. We were concerned about the proposed change of use of a storage facility associated with a retail shop in front, which was being proposed to, as a dwelling. The two reasons for refusal related to loss of retail floor space and concerns about viability of the unit within Swanage, and concern about poor amenity for future occupiers of the site. But unfortunately, the inspector considered that because the unit had been previously hired out to meet other business needs rather than that of the retail unit, he couldn't see that there was any harm arising if it was lost to residential use. And then the inspector considered the small interior spaces, the lack of outlook, but considered that as the property wouldn't be used as family housing, it wouldn't be harmful for the bedroom to have such a poor outlook, and also considered that due to the proximity of the site to public open space, including the beach, there was no concerns related to the lack of amenity space, or and overall considered that the design requirements of the policy D were fulfilled. So again, it was an appeal that was allowed, but again, costs were not awarded. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Liz. So item 8 is urgent items, and members will be pleased to know that we don't have any again today. So we have now reached the end of the meeting, 12:33. Can I thank you all very much for your participation this morning, and we'll see you next month.
Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Madam
Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Madam Chairman.